The absolute silence of an industrial anechoic chamber does not sound like peace. When you systematically strip away the ambient hum of the city grid, the low, persistent drone of the central air conditioning units, and the distant, constant rumble of street traffic, the resulting silence becomes a heavy, physical pressure pushing inward against the eardrums. Standing in the exact center of the foam wedge testing room, the only thing I could actually hear was the rushing, rhythmic, persistent tide of my own bloodstream pumping through my neck. I adjusted the heavy steel collar of the equipment tripod, my fingers moving with the practiced, meticulous precision that my acoustic engineering career demanded. I carefully mounted the Class 1 calibrated measurement microphone, securing the delicate capsule that cost more than my first vehicle. Everything was perfectly aligned. The diagnostic test frequencies were cued on my tablet and ready to sweep the room. I took a slow, methodical step backward to review the spatial placement of the array, entirely forgetting about the thick, heavy bundle of black XLR cables I had unspooled across the metal floor grating just 10 minutes prior. The thick rubber tread of my left work boot snagged violently on a cable loop. Gravity, as always, proved to be my absolute greatest adversary. I pitched backward, my arms windmilling wildly in a frantic, desperate attempt to avoid knocking over the $3,000 microphone stand. I managed to twist my torso just enough to save the delicate gear, but my left elbow slammed heavily into the massive, foot-thick steel and acoustic mass door just as the heavy exterior latch turned from the outside hallway. The heavy door swung outward, dragging my off-balance weight along with it for a humiliating half-second before I stumbled out into the brightly lit corridor. The sudden, chaotic influx of downtown traffic noise washed into the deadened testing room, followed immediately by the sharp, distinct scent of roasted espresso beans and damp autumn leaves. Oh, man. Sorry. My fault entirely, I muttered, aggressively rubbing my stinging elbow and taking a clumsy, unbalanced step backward to clear the doorway. The woman standing in the hallway did not step back. She stood, rooted to the linoleum floor, her posture radiating a high-frequency tension that preceded a structural collapse. She looked about 36, wrapped in a tailored, beige trench coat that had clearly seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, highly practical metal clip, though a few stray strands had escaped to frame dark, exhausted eyes. She held up a crumpled piece of thick, formal, legal paper, her knuckles stark white from the sheer force of her grip. The metal pen she had been holding in the same hand slipped from her trembling grasp, clattering loudly against the floor grating. I crouched down instantly, heat rushing up my neck. I retrieved the pen, wiping the barrel quickly on the denim leg of my jeans before standing back up and offering it to her. She didn't take it immediately. She just stared at the legal document in her hand, then shoved it closer to my chest. I own the Echo Room, and I have exactly 14 days before I lose it. I took the pen back, keeping my hands carefully away from her personal space. 14 days? 14 days, she confirmed, her voice clipping the syllables with the precise diction of someone trying very hard to hold a crumbling foundation together. My landlord just served me a cure or quit notice for municipal noise ordinance violations. If I don't completely mitigate a 90-decibel low-frequency acoustic leak by the end of the month, he brings in the city inspectors to red tag the building and change the locks. If he locks those doors, I am legally obligated to refund the venue deposits for the massive charity gala scheduled for next Friday. If I refund those deposits, I bankrupt the venue completely. And if the city formally revokes my zoning compliance due to a red tag shutdown, I permanently lose my commercial entertainment license. I will never be allowed to open another live music space in this city again. My jaw unclenched, then locked again. I stopped rubbing my elbow and reread the printed notice without blinking. It was a perfectly designed snare. The heavy, embossed lettering at the very top of the claimant section read Abram Gray. I recognized the name immediately from several downtown zoning disputes. He was a local commercial real estate developer with a notorious, ruthless reputation for buying out historic property leases, cornering the legacy tenants with obscure municipal code violations, gutting the historic buildings, and turning them into sterile, high-priced luxury lofts. I read the detailed technical breakdown of the noise complaint, my eyes quickly scanning the itemized decibel logs attached to the back page of the document. The raw numbers simply did not make structural sense. I read them again, analyzing the specific frequency bands he was claiming as violations. The awkward, fumbling heat in my neck completely vanished, instantly replaced by the cold, clear, undeniable logic of acoustic mathematics. He is citing a C-weighted decibel limit using an A-weighted meter reading, I said, my voice dropping its nervous, apologetic cadence, becoming calm and solidly anchored in my domain. She blinked, the frantic pace of her breathing pausing for a fraction of a second. What does that actually mean? It means he is manipulating the data to force an eviction, I explained, tapping the thick paper with the blunt end of the pen. A-weighting is an acoustic curve designed specifically to mimic human hearing, focusing heavily on speech frequencies. C-weighting measures the raw, physical power of low-end bass frequencies. He is using the wrong scale to measure the low-end vibrations radiating from your stage, applying a much stricter penalty where it doesn't legally apply according to the municipal zoning code. It is scientifically invalid. It is a procedural trap meticulously designed to fail you. She exhaled a long, shaky, ragged breath. The rigid tension in her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Can you prove that on a formal, legal municipal record? I can, I said, turning back into the testing room to grab my heavy, reinforced Pelican case full of specialized diagnostic gear. I hoisted the heavy plastic case up by the thick rubber handle, immediately bumping the solid, reinforced corner against the steel doorframe with a loud, echoing thud. I winced, adjusting my grip. Lead the way. We navigated the 3 busy blocks from my engineering firm down to the echo room. The late afternoon air hanging over the downtown farmers market was heavy with the sticky, impending humidity of autumn rain. The atmosphere smelled sharply of wet asphalt, distant food truck exhaust, and the sweet, crushed basil from the closing vendor stalls. She maintained a punishing, relentless pace, her heels clicking a sharp, anxious rhythm against the uneven, cracked concrete of the historic district. I adjusted my grip on the thick rubber handle of my equipment case, lengthening my stride to match hers, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the pavement to ensure my heavy work boots didn't catch on a stray cobblestone. When we finally arrived, she quickly unlocked the heavy, graffiti-covered double doors, and the venue opened up before us. It was a cavernous, stunningly beautiful space originally built in the 1920s, featuring exposed, weathered brick walls, massive heavy timber roof trusses, and a polished, heavily scarred oak floor that had supported decades of crowds. From a strict acoustic engineering standpoint, however, it was a complete and utter nightmare. There were hard, parallel surfaces everywhere, a corrugated tin roof that would reflect every single hi-hat cymbal crash directly back into the audience, and there was absolutely zero mechanical decoupling between the wooden stage and the concrete foundation. Standing in the exact center of the historic room, looking thoroughly out of place in a pristine, tailored charcoal suit, was Abram Gray. He was meticulously adjusting a digital decibel meter securely mounted on a lightweight aluminum tripod. Clara, Abram said, checking a heavy silver watch on his wrist without bothering to look up. You are supposed to be running a full band sound check for the charity gala right now, aren't you? If you hit the 80 decibel threshold again today, I am filing the legal injunction tomorrow morning. No extensions, no grace periods. I want the keys. Clara's jaw tightened visibly. She stepped past me, her posture rigid and unyielding. I brought my own acoustic engineer, Abram. Abram sneered, finally looking up from his device. He looked me up and down with blatant dismissal. I was wearing faded, dust-streaked jeans and a company polo shirt that had come slightly untucked from my earlier collision with the steel door. This kid? Look, Clara, the lease terms are painfully clear. Any continuous noise measuring above 70 decibels at the exterior property line is a material breach of contract. I have the continuous data logging running right now. You cannot argue with raw data. I walked over to where his tripod was set up, my eyes critically scanning the specific placement of his microphone capsule. You are placing the meter directly against a load-bearing structural column, I said, keeping my tone entirely respectful, devoid of any arrogance but absolutely firm. That column is acting as a direct flanking path for the structural vibration. You are not measuring airborne sound transmission. You are measuring mechanical resonance traveling through the timber. The city code explicitly requires a free field measurement, taken at least 3 feet away from any reflective or conductive surface. Abram frowned deeply, stepping protectively in front of his gear. The meter reads what the meter reads. Do not touch the equipment. I just need to see the calibration sticker on the capsule to verify the date. I leaned in to look at the side of his device. As I shifted my weight, the heavy, reinforced edge of my Pelican case swung forward and caught the spindly metal leg of his aluminum tripod. The tripod tipped violently. I lunged forward to catch it, my hands completely missing the metal bar. The decibel meter hit the solid oak floor with a sharp, catastrophic crack. The digital LCD screen shattered into a spiderweb of black ink, and the plastic battery cover popped off, skidding under a nearby stage amplifier. A suffocating, highly pressurized silence descended on the vast room. I stood up slowly, pulling my empty hands back to my sides. I will absolutely pay to replace the hardware. I have the engineering firm's insurance card right here. Abram's face turned a mottled, furious red. Are you kidding me? You ruined my baseline data. That was my primary logging device. Actually, it isn't, I corrected gently, unlatching the heavy steel clasps of my Pelican case and flipping the lid open. My firm requires continuous parallel logging for any site visit. I have been recording the free field ambient data on a separate, securely encrypted channel since I walked through the front doors. I pulled my own Class 1 NOR 140 sound level meter from my jacket pocket, tapping the active screen. Furthermore, your device was actively uploading to your cloud server via its cellular module before it fell. Your baseline log is perfectly safe, which means the city will have a permanent, digital record proving you were intentionally measuring mechanical vibration rather than airborne acoustics. Your current complaint is built on a procedural error that any municipal judge will throw out immediately. I set up a heavy dodecahedron omnidirectional speaker in the exact center of the room, ran the thick, shielded cables to the portable amplifier, and hit the power switch. I am running a true, free-field pink noise sweep now. Let's see what the actual, legally binding acoustic leakage is. The large room instantly filled with the rushing, torrential static of the test frequencies, a dense wall of sound that covered the entire human hearing spectrum simultaneously. I walked the perimeter of the room slowly, my eyes locked on the spectrum analyzer screen in my hand, calling out the structural weak points while Abram watched. His arms crossed tightly over his chest in silent, impotent fury. The historic brick is highly porous, I announced, writing the exact data points on my tablet with a digital stylus. We have a massive acoustic leak at the 125 Hz band right above the north exterior windows, and the main stage is completely hard-coupled to the floor joists. Every single time a kick drum hits, it turns the entire building into a giant, resonant speaker. Abram scoffed, turning sharply toward the heavy exit doors. You have exactly 13 days left, Clara. Fix the leaks to code, or hand over the keys. He stormed out, his expensive leather shoes crunching loudly over the broken plastic of his ruined meter. I tapped the screen on my diagnostic device, instantly killing the pink noise. The silence that rushed back into the room felt profoundly different this time. It felt heavy with consequence. Clara was staring at the empty doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around her own torso, looking significantly smaller than she had in the hallway earlier. The very next morning, I sat across from Clara in her cramped, poorly lit back office. The small space was a chaotic, desperate archive of her life's work, cluttered with framed, faded concert posters, towering stacks of unpaid vendor invoices, and a cold cup of coffee sitting precariously on the very edge of her scratched wooden desk. The specialized acoustic sealant, the metal resilient channels, the dense mass-loaded vinyl for the north wall, Clara said, scanning the detailed, itemized proposal I had printed out and highlighted for her. She rubbed her left temple with 2 fingers. This is $40,000 of raw materials and specialized labor. If I pay this invoice right now, I cannot pay the Gala caterers or the security deposit. If the Gala fails, I am bankrupt anyway. This is a dead end. The specialized materials are indeed expensive, I explained quietly, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap to avoid knocking anything over. But my firm is willing to let me do the labor off hours. I have full clearance to use the heavy equipment. I can do the installation at night, after my regular shift ends. Why would you do that? She asked, her dark eyes narrowing sharply. She was so entirely used to fighting alone, so accustomed to the world constantly trying to take things from her, that the concept of an actual ally triggered immediate suspicion. This is business only. You can walk away at any time. The contract stands, I said earnestly, leaning forward slightly in the creaky chair. You are just vibrating at the wrong frequency. We can tune the building. I reached across the cluttered desk to point at a specific structural detail on the blueprint regarding the north wall insulation. As I retracted my arm, the loose cuff of my heavy work jacket caught the exposed edge of her coffee cup. It tipped in agonizing slow motion. Brown, cold, liquid, spilled across the desk, completely soaking a stack of old, glossy, promotional flyers. "Oh no, I am so sorry," I stammered, scrambling backward in my chair so fast it nearly tipped over. I grabbed a fistful of coarse brown paper towels from a commercial dispenser on the wall and frantically dabbed at the pooling mess, probably just pushing the liquid deeper into the paper fibers. Clara closed her eyes, pinching the bridge of her nose tightly. "It is fine. Really. It was cold anyway. Just leave it. I will replace it," I said, retreating quickly toward the door, staring at the floor to avoid making eye contact. I practically ran out of the building, navigating the busy morning sidewalk down to the corner cafe. When I returned 15 minutes later, I didn't just bring back a generic black coffee. I had specifically noticed the discarded branded cups in her trash can the day before. I walked carefully, deliberately into her office and set a fresh, steaming cup on the one completely dry corner of her desk. "Black, with a heavy dash of cinnamon," I said softly, stepping back immediately, "and I secured the plastic lid tightly so I cannot accidentally spill it again." She looked at the cup, the thin wisps of steam rising through the small opening, then slowly looked up at me. The hard, defensive, rigid lines around her mouth softened infinitesimally. She reached out and wrapped both her hands around the warm cardboard sleeve. "You noticed the cinnamon." "I notice a lot of things," I said, keeping my hands firmly shoved deep in my pockets so I wouldn't knock anything else over. "I notice that you have 30 local bands relying heavily on this stage for their livelihood. I notice Abram Gray wants to gut this place because he only sees the square footage, not the community history. I want to stop him." I pulled my right hand out of my pocket just long enough to slide a new, perfectly dry piece of legal paper across the desk. "You only pay the labor cost if we successfully pass the final city inspection and you officially keep the lease. If we fail, or if he locks the doors, you owe me absolutely nothing." Clara took a slow, measured sip of the coffee, looking at the black ink on the page. She picked up a black pen and signed her name on the bottom line. For the next week, my life became a grueling, relentless cycle. I spent daylight hours analyzing acoustic models at my corporate job, and nighttime hours breathing in fine construction dust at the Echo Room. The venue constantly smelled of old, dry wood, pulverized brick dust, and the sharp, distinct chemical tang of industrial acoustic caulk. We fell into a quiet, highly functional routine. Every night, exactly around 10 o'clock, Clara would emerge from her back office. She would have traded her sharp trench coat for worn-out jeans and a faded band t-shirt, carrying 2 cardboard boxes of takeout from the late-night Thai place down the street. "You are going to burn yourself out," she said one Tuesday night. She climbed the short wooden stairs and set a carton of pad Thai on the edge of the stage, exactly 3 feet away from where I was aggressively drilling metal-resilient channels into the drywall. "I am perfectly fine," I said, wiping a thick layer of drywall dust off my forehead with the back of my forearm. I climbed down the aluminum ladder, my heavy boots hitting the floor with a solid thud. I picked up my sound meter from the floor and showed her the digital screen. "The STC rating on this wall is already up by 10 full points. We are suffocating the high frequencies perfectly. The sound energy is converting to trace heat inside the vinyl layer exactly as designed." I sat on the edge of the stage, leaving a wide, respectful gap between us. She handed me a pair of wooden chopsticks. I took them, focusing on the simple action of eating. The venue was dark, lit only by a pair of harsh halogen work lights that cast long, dramatic, warm shadows across the exposed brick. "When is the final load-in for the charity gala?" I asked, pulling a thick black Sharpie out of my leather tool belt. "Friday at 4 p.m., she said, carefully separating her noodles. I uncapped the marker with my teeth and wrote, "Friday 4 p.m., load in bold block letters on the back of my left hand, right below where I had already written City Permit Due Wed. Clara paused mid-bite, staring at my hand. "You write my deadlines on yourself?" "I do not trust my phone calendar," I said, capping the marker and tossing it back into my leather pouch. "And this way, I see it every single time I pick up a drill or a hammer. It reminds me exactly what the target is." She set her food down and stood up, dusting off her jeans. "Come here. I want to show you something." I set my food down and followed her to the back of the venue, down the narrow, dimly lit hallway near her office. There was an old, massive upright piano sitting in the deep shadows, covered in a dusty gray canvas tarp. "My grandfather used to play this," Clara said quietly, reaching out to trace the outline beneath the heavy canvas. "He built the original stage in this room with his own hands." Abram wants me to throw it out in the alley to make room for a mandated HVAC upgrade. I have been hiding it back here. You shouldn't hide it, I said, analyzing the dimensions of the hallway. It belongs in your office. It is way too heavy. The casters are completely rusted. I cannot move it, and I don't want to risk asking my staff and having Abram find out. I can handle it, I said. I stepped behind the heavy wooden instrument, bracing my boots firmly against the floorboards. I found the structural leverage points on the back frame, bypassing the fragile decorative wood, and pushed with my legs. My muscles strained, the rusted casters squeaking violently in protest, resisting for a long moment before the heavy wood finally began to roll. I guided it carefully, inch by grueling inch, through the narrow doorframe of her office, maneuvering it perfectly against the back wall, reclaiming the physical space for her. As I stepped back, brushing the dust off my hands, I misjudged the raised brass floor transition strip. My heel caught, and I bumped my head hard against the low wooden doorframe. Ow, Clara gasped, reaching out instinctively, then quickly covered her mouth. A sudden, genuine laugh escaped her lips, a bright, clear, musical sound that completely changed the geometry of her face, erasing the deep shadows under her eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked, still laughing softly. "I have a remarkably thick skull," I said, rubbing the back of my head. "It is an absolute occupational requirement for the job." The warm, protective quiet of that night shattered completely 2 days later. It was Thursday afternoon. I was on my lunch break from the engineering firm, stopping by the venue in my work clothes to check the curing process of the acoustic sealant. Clara was in the main room, pacing frantically in tight circles, her face entirely pale. A man in a crisp city inspector's uniform was standing near the front double doors, holding a metal clipboard. Abram Gray was standing right beside him. "What is going on?" I asked, dropping my heavy tool bag onto the floor with a loud thud. "Surprise inspection," Clara said, her voice shaking, her hands trembling at her sides. Abram filed an expedited, emergency municipal safety complaint regarding the HVAC ducting. The inspector wants to test the duct acoustic leakage right now. If we refuse the test, he has the legal authority to red tag the building on the spot and evacuate the premises permanently. I looked at the massive HVAC ducts. They were the very last item on my punch list. They were huge, unlined, exposed sheet metal pipes that carried forced air and sound directly from the ceiling out to the back alleyway. If they tested it right now, the metal would resonate like a massive bell. It would fail spectacularly. "Mr. Evans," Abram said, checking his silver watch, "the inspector is going to run a 90-decibel sweep through the main PA system. If the noise level in the alley hits 70 decibels, she is shut down permanently." Today, I didn't argue. I didn't look at Abram. "I need exactly 9 minutes to prepare the venue for the test," I said, grabbing the heavy handles of my tool bag. I sprinted toward the back utility closet, my boots skidding dangerously on the polished oak floor. I hauled a 70-pound roll of dense, mass-loaded vinyl onto my shoulder and grabbed a 5-gallon bucket of heavy acoustic putty. I scrambled up the aluminum access ladder to the exposed ductwork near the ceiling. My hands, usually so clumsy and unpredictable in social spaces, were lightning fast now, driven by pure adrenaline and ingrained mechanical muscle memory. I unrolled the heavy vinyl, wrapping the massive metal junction where the duct met the exterior brick wall. I pulled thick, industrial-grade zip ties around the vinyl with all my physical strength, mechanically decoupling the vibrating metal from the wooden ceiling joists. I jammed handfuls of the thick acoustic putty into every visible seam, violently sealing the air gaps. I was sweating completely through my shirt, my shoulder muscles burning with lactic acid, my fingers slick with putty. But I didn't stop until I heard the inspector shout from the main floor below, "Running the diagnostic test now." A deafening, punishing sweep of white noise blasted through the venue's massive speakers. I stayed on the top rung of the ladder, pressing both my hands flat against the vinyl wrap, feeling the intense, violent vibration of the metal beneath, praying the raw mass of the vinyl would hold the kinetic sound energy inside the pipe. Down in the back alley, visible through the high window, the inspector looked at his handheld meter. He tapped the digital screen. He looked up at the vent, then wrote something deliberately on his clipboard. 68 decibels, the inspector called out, walking back inside. "It passes code." Abram's jaw clenched tight. He glared up at me on the ladder, then turned on his heel and walked away without uttering a single word. I climbed down the ladder slowly, my arms physically shaking from the sudden adrenaline crash. Clara was waiting for me at the bottom rung. She didn't speak. She just reached out and gripped the dusty sleeve of my shirt, holding on tight, her knuckles white, grounding herself. 10 minutes later, we sat side by side on the hard floor near the stage, the venue quiet once again. I was catching my breath, wiping putty off my hands with a rag. Clara reached into the front pocket of her jeans and pulled out a small, faded Polaroid photograph. "This is why I fight him," she said softly, handing it to me. I took the photograph with extreme, deliberate care, holding it by the very edges so my dirty, sweaty fingers wouldn't smudge the glossy image. It was a picture of Clara as a little girl, wearing a too-big denim jacket, standing right next to an older man on this very stage. The man was holding a vintage acoustic guitar, smiling broadly. "My grandfather," she said, staring at the stage. "When he died, I promised him I would keep the doors open. If Abram takes this building, I lose the very last piece of him." I handed the photo back to her, my movements slow and gentle. "I won't let Abram take it. I promise you that." But Abram Gray wasn't finished. He understood the system better than anyone. On Friday morning, the day of the massive charity gala, I arrived at the venue with my final checklist, only to find Clara sitting on the concrete front steps, staring blankly at the screen of her phone. "He found a legal loophole," she said, not looking up. "The city noise ordinance has a secondary, obscure clause about continuous structural vibration transmission. Daisy Hill's band is headlining the gala tonight. It's heavy bass. Abram has legally requested the city zoning commissioner to personally attend tonight to measure the floor vibration from the basement, directly under the subwoofers. We didn't decouple the subwoofers from the stage. The joists will rattle. We will fail." My chest tightened as the physics calculated in my head. Low-frequency bass waves don't just travel through the air, they travel through solid mass. If the massive subwoofers sat directly on the wooden stage, the floor would act like a giant drumhead, sending the vibrations straight down into the foundation. "Vance, just go," Clara said, her voice cracking as she stood up, retreating toward the heavy doors. "But if the zoning commissioner sees your firm's name attached to a failed structural test tonight, it will ruin your professional reputation. I should have anticipated this. I shouldn't have relied on anyone else." I stood there on the sidewalk, my hands curled into tight fists inside my jacket pockets. She retreated into the venue, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. I walked back to my truck. I sat behind the steering wheel and stared down at the back of my hand. The black ink was blurred from days of sweat and construction dust, but the words were still clearly legible. Friday, 4 p.m. Load in. My fingers stopped fidgeting. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked. Then I turned the key in the ignition. At 6 p.m., the venue was packed to absolute capacity. The charity gala was in full swing, the air thick with heat, anticipation, and the smell of spilled beer. Daisy Hill was on stage, tuning her guitar, getting ready to launch into her bass-heavy set. I slipped through the back alley door, carrying 2 heavy canvas duffel bags. I ran down the narrow, dimly lit concrete stairs to the venue's basement, arriving directly beneath the primary stage. Through the ceiling planks above me, I could hear the roar of the crowd murmuring. I didn't have time for elegance or overthinking. I unzipped the bags, pulling out 4 industrial-grade neoprene acoustic isolation pads, 2 heavy-duty hydraulic car jacks, and my tablet to log the structural changes for the city record. I positioned the hydraulic jacks directly under the primary load-bearing wooden beams that supported the stage subwoofers above. Working with frantic, burning precision, I pumped the heavy steel handles of the jacks, applying massive upward pressure just enough to lift the supporting beams 2 millimeters off the foundation plate. "Temporary vibration isolation," I muttered, logging the entry into my tablet with a digital timestamp. Non-invasive, no drilling, no cutting of structural timber, fully removable under commissioner oversight. I slid the thick, dense neoprene rubber pads into the tiny gaps I had created, then slowly released the hydraulic pressure, lowering the massive wooden beams back down so they rested entirely on the rubber. I repeated the excruciating physical process for all 4 contact points, my breathing ragged in the dusty basement air. Directly above my head, the bass dropped. The music exploded into the room. I placed my bare hand flat against the basement brick wall. The air in the room was incredibly loud, shaking the dust from the rafters, but the physical brick beneath my palm was completely, entirely still. The thick neoprene rubber had absorbed the kinetic energy. I had successfully decoupled the stage. I had prevented the structural transmission. I hastily packed my hydraulic jacks, ran up the concrete stairs, and pushed my way through the dense, cheering crowd into the main room. Abram Gray was standing near the back sound booth, the city zoning commissioner standing right beside him holding a specialized, highly sensitive vibration meter. Abram was smiling a cruel, victorious smile, waiting for the needle to jump into the red zone. Before the commissioner could look at his screen, Daisy Hill stepped off the side of the stage, her guitar slung over her back, and walked directly over to the commissioner. She handed him a printed piece of paper. "What is that?" Abram snapped, his smile faltering. "A blind copy forward from a disgruntled clerk at the building inspector's office," Daisy said cleanly, her voice carrying clearly over the music. "It was sent to the venue's public inbox this morning. It's an email you sent to the inspector yesterday, explicitly instructing him to ignore the standard airborne test and specifically target the floor joists because you knew the building's historic age made it physically vulnerable. That is a documented, direct manipulation of a municipal inspection." The commissioner frowned deeply, reading the printed email, his eyes narrowing. He then looked down at his highly sensitive meter. He tapped the glass. The needle was barely moving above the baseline. "It is reading a peak of 0.02 inches per second, the commissioner said loudly, looking back up at Abram with clear disgust. "The legal limit for a violation is 0.5. Combined with this email establishing clear, malicious intent to weaponize city resources, this building is perfectly compliant, Mr. Gray." Abram's face drained of color. "That is impossible. The floor should be shaking." I stepped out of the crowd, adjusting the collar of my shirt. I walked straight up to the stage, making direct eye contact with Clara, who was standing near the heavy velvet curtain, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. "For the official municipal record," I said loudly to the commissioner, projecting my voice clearly over the ambient noise. "The structural transmission of low-frequency energy has been fully decoupled, using logged, code-compliant neoprene isolation pads at the primary load-bearing joists. The kinetic energy is currently being dispersed harmlessly as trace heat. The echo room is operating well within all municipal safety codes." The commissioner nodded, pulling a pen from his pocket and signing the bottom of his official clipboard. "Thank you for the structural clarification, Mr. Evans. The complaint is formally dismissed. Have a good evening." Abram went pale, his jaw working silently. He turned on his heel and pushed his way out the heavy front doors, disappearing into the night. 3 hours later, the venue was entirely empty except for me and Clara. The harsh fluorescent cleanup lights were on, casting a blinding glare over the swept wooden floors and the stacked chairs. I was kneeling near the edge of the stage, methodically coiling a long black XLR cable. My fingers slipped, and I dropped a plastic zip tie onto the floor. Clara crouched down beside me, her knees popping slightly, and picked it up. She didn't hand it to me immediately. She just watched my hands as I finished wrapping the cable and secured it with a Velcro strap. "You came back," she said softly, her voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. "I had to fix the joists," I replied, focusing intently on the black cable, avoiding her eyes. "The STC rating wouldn't hold up in court without properly decoupling the subwoofers." Clara reached out, her fingers gently touching my wrist, stopping my movement completely. The contact was warm, grounding. "Vance, stop talking about STC ratings for 1 second. I looked up. The deep, heavy exhaustion that had defined her face for the last 2 weeks was completely gone, replaced by something warm, open, and incredibly steady. "When you walked out this morning," Clara said, her voice tight with emotion, "I realized that losing this building would hurt immensely. But watching you walk away, what scares you the most, Vance?" I looked at the massive venue around us. The historic brick we had painstakingly sealed, the ancient floor we had saved. I looked back at her dark eyes. I didn't stumble over my words. I didn't drop anything. "Losing you forever scares me the most," I replied, my voice steady in the vast room. "This building is just wood and brick and metal. You are the music. I don't want to just fix your walls and leave. I want to be here to listen to it." Clara exhaled a long, shuddering breath. She didn't pull away. She just kept her hand resting gently on my wrist, holding the connection steady, a quiet, immovable anchor in the massive room. 2 days later, we sat together in the bright, sterile, aggressively lit city zoning board office. The final hearing to officially close Abram's complaint case was merely a formality, but it required physical signatures on the municipal documents. The city clerk slid the heavy stack of paperwork across the desk toward Clara. "Sign here to confirm the permanent structural compliance. Miss Parker, and we need the primary engineer's signature as well to close the file." Clara took the pen. She signed her name with a bold, sweeping, confident stroke. Then she slid the thick paper over to me. She didn't just pass it. She looked at the clerk, her chin lifted in quiet, absolute defiance. "This is Vance Evans," Clara said clearly, her voice echoing slightly in the small, bureaucratic room. "He is not just my engineer. He is my partner." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name right next to hers in black ink, locking the reality into the page. "I also have the permanent retainer contract," I said, sliding a second, thinner manila folder across the desk to Clara. "It mandates monthly compliance checks, full acoustic monitoring, and routine maintenance." Clara smiled, a bright, unburdened expression, signing the retainer without a moment of hesitation. "The charity gala proceeds have officially cleared the bank. The staff payroll is funded for the next 6 months, and the venue's operating budget is completely stable." We stood up, and I handed her the stamped copy of the city permit. I turned to leave, and immediately bumped my hip hard against the sharp edge of the clerk's metal desk, muttering a quick apology. Clara just laughed as we walked out of the office and into the bright, busy afternoon sun. The city sounded loud again, but unlike the absolute, crushing silence of the anechoic chamber, the noise didn't feel like a physical pressure anymore. It just felt like life. I learned that winning the wrong way is actually losing, and true victory is going home with a clear conscience. Real love isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistency, safety, and showing up to do the hard work together. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.